So it is Halloween as I am beginning this, and it's been forever since I have done a reading vlog, but I think I'm gonna attempt one again because it's basically all I've been watching recently on YouTube, and so I kind of just want to try to do it again. Not to mention, I have a collection of books that I am trying to read this month that kind of work together and I feel like would make a good video. So this week I'm going to be focusing on reading cult books, which I'm so excited about because this list includes all books that have come to my shelf within like this year, within 2023, and I don't typically read like my new books, and so I'm just excited to give them hello. So I'm excited to be able to like read them while I'm still really motivated to do so. Also shout out to Nerdy Nat Reads, who did this type of video. She did a 5x5, which she does frequently, that was centered on cult books, and actually it's because of that that I'm even doing this one, because one of these books I didn't realize was a cult book or like had a cult in it at all. So because of that, I am now able to do this, and two of these books are in her video as well. So I have 3 books that I am planning on reading in this video. However, there's one that I'm kind of just including in, which is The Shards by Bret, Easton, Ellis. So this book was technically on my October TBR. It's the last day of October. I might finish it today, but probably not, because this book is like a lot to read emotionally. It is honestly, I've just been like struggling with reading it. And it's not to say anything like bad about the book, it's just like the content that's in it is very difficult to read through, and it makes me feel really uncomfortable a lot of the time. And I love a book that can evoke strong feelings, and this one's definitely doing it. However, it does mean that I can't read it quickly. So I decided to just start this video while I was still finishing this book, so I'll probably talk about it in this. And bonus, there is a cult in this. It's not a huge part of the subject matter of the book, but technically it does exist in this, so it kind of works. But the serial killer is definitely like a larger part of this book than the cult is. So that is the trawler, and basically this whole book is about the senior year of Bret Easton Ellis and his friends, all while like knowing that the trawler is out there, and possibly like events happening to people at the school are because of that. I'm trying not to say anything that happens later in the story, since I've obviously read a lot of this at this point. But I will say that it is alluded to a lot at the beginning. Like right away, as soon as you start reading it, he is talking about like how crazy that year was, how much their lives changed, like the fall of their senior year. He'll end like a lot of scenes and being like, and that was the last time I think any of us truly felt safe. So there's a lot of like dread in this book, and that I think is honestly the best way that I could describe the feeling that it gives you, especially in the beginning. It turns into just like being uncomfortable for a lot of the time, especially like the conversations that like Bret himself is having with other people. I just kind of want to be like, shut up, shut up, shut up. So I'll be trying to finish that book up within this video, but probably just reading a little bit each day. But the book that I'll be more focusing on is The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. I've read 2 other Ashley Winstead books now, In My Dreams I Hold a Knife and Midnight is the Darkest Hour, which just came out. And so this is the only other thriller that I haven't read by her, but I actually don't know what this one's about at all, because I just picked it up because it's Ashley Winstead, and I kind of want to keep up with that. Like I want to go into it blind. So this is the one that I'm going to start this week focusing on. About 60 pages, 5 chapters of The Last Housewife so far, and I'm loving it. It got into it so quickly, which I was a little bit worried about because the main character is not like in the town where the inciting incident happens, not even in the same state. So I was a little bit worried that it was going to be like one of those where she needs like convincing or like several things to happen in order for her to go there and like try to look into what's going on in person. But instead she was just like immediately like, well, I guess I'm booking a plane ticket and going, like as soon as she heard. Basically this follows Shay, who lives in Texas, but she went to school in New York with some friends, and there's something weird that had happened, and 2 of her friends have now died. So the first one died a while ago. I can't remember like what the timeline's supposed to be, but like many years ago. and it was deemed a suicide. And then this book starts with her other friend that she was really close with in college dying. Also, they're saying from suicide, but there's some like suspicious things about it. Also, she's like meeting back up with a childhood friend that she had, but very happy. I've been having such bad luck with my books and my reading lately, especially for the books that I expect to be faster paced. So now having one that's actually fast paced is really nice. Halfway through this book already, which is pretty good for me. It's a pretty good pace, and just this book is fast-paced in general. I'm having so much fun reading this. It is like darker subject matter for sure, and there are times that are kind of hard to read, but it at least has like the breaks of like nice friendships being a part of it. Basically what I'm saying is it doesn't feel like the Shards, which is just constant. Like even when it's just the friends talking, I'm still just like really uncomfortable. Even during like the more innocuous conversations, just because you're only in the protagonist's head, and a lot of the times he's thinking like, oh, I have to play this, what does he call it? The active participant or something along those lines, where he's basically saying like, I have to play this part in order to like finish high school and just like do this year, and then I can go somewhere else and be someone else afterwards. So even during the conversations where it's like about things that should be just fine, he's still like constantly thinking about like the role he has to play. But in this book, like when she's truly just talking to a friend of hers from like childhood, it's just like generally a nice moment. I mean, there's definitely, she's like talking about her past and everything, so still a lot of trauma in there, but it feels different. It feels like there's at least some type of like safety, some type of comfort that exists within this book, which is really great. So the format, she's basically like talking to her childhood friend who now has a podcast, and so a lot of like the conversations are kind of under the guise of being a part of an interview for the podcast, and so it's through these interviews that you get to hear more about Shay's past and what she went through with Laurel, who's her friend that just died, and the reason why she's back in town to like look into this. So you're getting like the perspective of their past, and typically when I read like thriller books or books like this that has like what's happening in present day and what's happening in the past, I sometimes really struggle with what's happening in the past. But for this story, I was like so engrossed in it, and I wanted to know so badly like what their past was. And I don't know how Ashley Winstead did that, because it's something that I always feel like I should care about and almost never do. This book, I get excited for when they start talking about the past. Like oddly, I think I'm more excited about like learning about the past than I am about the present, although that's starting to shift, which I think is exactly what she's going for in like writing the way that she does. I don't know, she does this structure so well. And there's very few authors I feel like that do it as well as this, and as like consistently well as this. It feels so good to be this into a book. I feel like it's been a while since I've been like so engrossed in a story. Housewife, and it was so good. This was a lot darker than I thought it was going to be, which makes sense because Midnight is the Darkest Hour is also pretty dark, but this, I think, subject matter wise, it takes that to a different level. There are some trigger warnings at the beginning of this book, and it's not like a a couple times that these things show up. It is over and over and over. So just to like warn you, there's a lot. That being said, I think that this is such a good book. I think there's a lot to be said about like agency in this. Oh shoot, my AC just kicked on. I hope that's not loud. And whether or not you can have like a predisposition for winding up in a situation like what our main character winds up in. It brings up a lot of like good conversations. Like I would actually love to have this be like a book club book because there's a lot that I want to talk about in it. But that is this book done. Oh, well, let me give it a star rating. I'm trying to get into doing star ratings. I think I would give this a 5 star. So typically I've given, when I have rated in the past, like almost nothing gets a 5 star. Well, there was a time when like anything would get a 5 star. And then there was a time when like nothing would get a 5 star. And now I'm like, I think trying to figure out what my rating system would even be. But I kind of decided recently that a 5 star book for me is either a book that has made me think about like life or something specific in like a whole new way. And then another like category would be like I couldn't put them down. And they captured my attention the entire way through. And I think that this book would fit into that. And also, I do think that it made me look at the world a little bit differently and think about things in a different way on top of that, which I think it solidifies it as a 5 star. So next, I think I'm gonna move on to Cultish by Amanda Montell. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this dust jacket because I cannot read hardcover books while they have the dust jacket on. And this will be my next read. Yesterday, but I have made some good progress today in Cultish. So I'm about halfway through now. And it's actually surprisingly readable for being a nonfiction. I was a little bit worried to include a nonfiction in this video in general, just because typically I really like to take my time with nonfictions, but it's been pretty easy going. Also, I just found out that my library has the audiobook, so I'll probably listen to that while I like do some cleaning today. I think that I should be able to finish this today, which should hopefully set me up to finish the last book like within the week. It's really neat like seeing a bunch of cults like kind of brought in to talk about like specific pieces of them, because there's so many similarities that I never would have guessed. I do remember reading the synopsis to this and thinking like, yeah, it is pretty weird that like a lot of cults or like groups use specific language to include people and to get them to feel like they belong. But this book also goes through like how that type of language could be helpful. Like the author worked for a suicide prevention hotline, and there were specific like words and phrases that they would use, and that could very well help save a person's life. Whereas there are some cults that like cause death, and people will do like a mass suicide, and the language is a huge contributing factor to that. So that was really interesting. Also, this idea of like education and these cults like coming from education. I remember watching The Vow, which is about Nexium, and that kind of starts from this place of education. Like you go to these like seminars and you learn, and then like slowly they build in all this other stuff. And for the people that stick around, like they're all of a sudden in this cult. But there's like many, many steps along the way where you could be like, you know what, this isn't for me, and leave it without thinking like this thing's crazy because you haven't like seen fully behind the curtain. Whereas somebody else might like make the decision to like stay a little bit longer, stay a little bit longer, stay a little bit longer until they are just like fully indoctrinated and like using the language and like fully believing in this thing. And if they teach enough people that like initial class, then they'll get enough people that want to stay past that, even if many, many, many of them are like, no thank you. So yeah, overall it's pretty good. I'm not like dying to pick it up or anything when I'm not reading it, but that makes sense. It's nonfiction, you know? But I do feel like I'm learning, and that does make me feel good. Cause baby, like, ooh, it's all another flower lay. The sun goes around the state. Can't wait for the long day. Cause baby, like, just finished Cultish. I ended up listening to the rest of it while cleaning. I cleaned way more than I planned on doing today, which is nice because now like the whole place feels really fresh and like it's gonna be a great weekend. I ended up liking the second half of this a lot more than the first half. I think it was interesting to hear about the cults, but then once it got more into like MLMs and things that aren't technically cults but feel that way, the types of people that join them, the causes of them, like why they're so prevalent, what makes them so prevalent in the US specifically, and also just like how capitalism in general, you know, feeds into specifically like those types of things, but even like the fitness culture around like SoulCycle and Peloton and how you like really have to like buy into it. Again, these things aren't actually cults. Basically, like there can be bad and cult-like things in many different types of groups, and being kind of aware of that going into it. I think that she does like a good job of showing you or providing you like the background to maybe just like be more observant when you're entering into groups, because groups are good for humans. Like it's good for us to be in groups. We're very social creatures. Like that's something that we all benefit from. But to like go into those situations and kind of be like thinking of a few things as you're getting like further and further into something, you know, is there like a cost to leave it? Whether that be like socially or like, are people gonna stop talking to you if you leave this like group? Or some things are like a monetary loss. It's like the whole sunk cost fallacy. If you've already put so much work into something, then leaving it already feels like it's a negative. Or like, I've already come this far, I don't wanna like back out now. So you're more willing to be like accepting of more and more things that maybe you wouldn't have accepted had you known about it like going into it initially. So yeah, it was very interesting to read about. I'm glad that I read this one. I think star rating, I would do like 3.5, I think. Not only that, but I also finished the Shards, finally. Oh my gosh, my brain. This book is like, I don't even know how to talk about it, but I'm really glad I'm done with it. And that's not to say that I didn't like the book or I don't think that it's a good book. But I just, being in it was taxing. It was emotionally draining in a way that I cannot describe. There's a lot of very graphic scenes that are so hard to read. Graphic sex scenes, but also like super gory, gross scenes. And so just know that if you're thinking about reading this book. This book was at about my limit for what I can handle. Yeah, I had a hard time getting through this book. Overall though, like story-wise, I think that it did a good job. I was really surprised by the ending, and I do think it's gonna be a book that I think about for a long time after having read it. If it didn't give me like the visceral feelings that it did, I probably would read it again, but I can't in good conscience put myself through that again. With that being said, that makes this really hard to rate because if I think about just like how I felt during it, not great. But if I think about like what it made me think about, but was it worth the mental torment that I feel like I went through to get there? I think for right now, I'm gonna go 3.75. I think that it's entirely possible that this rating will go up as I get more space from this book. But at this point, that's what I'm feeling. So that's what I'm gonna say. So yeah, that's the bonus review that you got of the Shards. Just me being really confused about my own emotions, not about what happened in the book. It's very clear what happens in the book. And with that, we are on to Rouge. I'm so excited for this one. So I have gotten a good way into Rouge. It just kind of took me a while to figure out my own thoughts on this, I think. So basically it starts at a funeral for the protagonist's mom. The protagonist is Mirabelle and her mom is Noelle. Her mom was like really obsessed with her own beauty, but I think Mirabelle is even more. I think she kind of like internalized that from her mom. It was a lot of like taking what her mother did and then twisting it or making it larger. There's a lot of like jealousy in it. As far as like the cult aspect, basically it's like seemingly her mom was getting into something and was starting to act like a little bit weird and a little bit scattered right before she died. By like falling off of a cliff into the ocean, which is all very early on, so not spoilers. And then Mirabel's kind of curious about what her mom was like getting into, and she kind of falls into discovering about that, which I think is as far as like as much as I can say. I would say that if you like Melissa Broder, at least I read Death Valley by her, and this reminds me a lot of Death Valley. So while I was updating you last night, my card filled up and I just didn't want to deal with like deleting stuff off of it to record the little bit left that I was going to say. So I just decided to save it for today. It was also late and I was tired. So I wanted to pick up with where I left off, which I think was me saying that this book it's like criticism about the beauty industry. And I think there's also something to be said about how you can only really succeed as being like truly beautiful if other people are like envious of you. And if that's like the end goal, is that really worth it? Which I think is good. So I actually read a little bit more after filming the bit that I did yesterday. I read some this morning and I'm really curious to see how this is gonna end now. I have no idea, but I'm much more invested now than I was at the beginning of the book. I think that this is just like a little bit too slow paced for me because overall like the story concept and the way that it's told even I really like, but because everything's taking so long, like I'll get bored in certain sections before it like moves on to the next one. I will say though that the second half of the book that does kind of die down a little bit. At this point, I am just excited to see how this one ends. I have to find out. So I finished Rouge. And actually, I finished it a while ago. I just haven't talked about it because I've been really struggling with like my thoughts on this book because they're kind of all over the place. The beginning of it, I think I just struggled with more. And then the second half really did improve for me. And the ending, I really liked, but my overall feelings towards it, I just can't like grasp how I feel, what my feelings are. So I guess I'll start by like summing up my thoughts about the end of it since I haven't really talked about that. It did a really good job of like summing up what happened and like feeling very conclusive at the end. As far as it being like a cult book, it doesn't give like the same feelings as like reading The Last Housewife, for example, where it's more firm like what's going on. This feels very much like there's like drugs involved and you can't really trust the mind. Not even just drugs, but just like there's this element of something going on and like you can never quite trust the narrator and what she sees as being reality, which I think is why it reminds me so much of Melissa Broder's Death Valley. But there is like consumption of things that could be drugs and likely are that like contribute to this, but it's not all just that. Like part of it's maybe like magical realism, I don't know. I could see like the little pieces that are like reminiscent of like real life cults and the types of people that get involved in it and everything. So that was kind of cool. But it also said a lot about the beauty industry, about the people that have the money that are able to afford being like fully in it versus the people that are just like scraping by and are also trying to participate in it to some extent because that's just like the expectations, especially around women. So I think that there's a lot towards like that part of it. I also think that it says a lot about parenthood, motherhood, and grief. And I was surprised kind of by how much it touched on that, which is silly, I know, because it starts like at her mother's funeral. But I liked where that part of it went, and it was something that I didn't expect. I guess actually the more that I'm talking about this, the more that I do kind of feel like I feel overall positive towards it. But it definitely was a little slower like towards the beginning, and I had a hard time like really connecting with the character because of like the looseness of the story. Anyways, overall star rating, because I do those now. I do those now. And it's fine, and I can give ratings. I think this is a 3.75. Yeah. I don't think I enjoyed it quite to the level of a 4, but it was really close to that. And I do think that there are like certain people that I would recommend this book to, and I'm also glad that I personally read it. But yeah, overall, not bad. I mean, I don't know if the shards can really be counted in this. Like, let's be real, it was more about the other 3. But I'm sliding it in here because like this looks like impressive to read in one video. Even though I really only read what, like 100 pages of the shards as a part of this. I'm so pleased with this video because these books were books that I was really excited about, and I think I'm doing a better job recently of like reading the books that I'm excited about when I'm excited about them, and that's just fun. Let me know if you liked this style of video. I'm planning another one already, so I'm hoping that you like it because this kind of worked really well for me and I enjoyed making it. So I'm excited to continue this with some other like themes to go along with it. If you have a theme that you would like to see me do, let me know. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video, so consider subscribing so you know when that happens, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.